Hi everyone, welcome to Oren Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. I'm your host Orinda, and today we're talking about Dune with David Meeks. Dune is a 1965 science fiction novel by American author Frank Herbert. Dune is set in the distant future amidst a feudal interstellar society in which various noble houses control planetary fiefs. It tells the story of young Paul Atreides, whose family accepts the stewardship of the planet Arrakis. While the planet is an inhospitable and sparsely populated desert wasteland, it is the only source of melange, or the spice, a drug that extends life and changes mental abilities. Melange is also necessary for space navigation, which requires a kind of multidimensional awareness and foresight that only the drug provides. As melange can only be produced on Arrakis, control of the planet is thus a coveted and dangerous undertaking. The story explores multi-layered interactions of politics, religion, ecology, technology, and human emotion, as the factions of the Empire confront each other in a struggle for the control of Arrakis and its spies. Of course, Dune also has been filmed in 1984 and 2021. Our guest today is David Meeks. Hello, David, and thank you for joining me.
Hi, you're welcome.
So, today we're talking about Dune. Can you tell me what is Dune?
Dune is a series of 6 to 8 books, depending on that are pretty intense, and uh, it took me 2 times to read the first one. There's so many characters involved, and it's really probably one of the best science fictions, according to what I've read, of the 20th century. Frank Herbert was really amazing. He was into history and politics, and he made this a neat series of books, kind of connected in some ways to our world, but in a futuristic world. And I like the first 1984 version of the film, even though it was short, and a lot of people had issues with it. And you never really could nobody ever could really make it into a movie because it's just so much. It would take a miniseries. But I like how they had the music, and Sting was in it, all these people were in it, and there's a long version. If you go on YouTube, there's a really long version that's out there that they added a bunch of stuff that was not in the feature film. It's over 3 hours. But I also like the fact that I live near Oregon, where Frank grew up, and his idea from the books came from the dunes. There's a place in Southern Oregon that's all sandy, and he got the idea from that. And I was just lucky to finally get my hands on the first edition copy of the book 25 years ago, and only paid $12 for this. It's worth quite a bit now. But I've only read the first couple books, and I've seen that there's the TV miniseries that Sci-Fi Channel put out was okay. And there's they made that Children of Dune, the second book, into a film, if you've seen that. And then in the late 80s, they had a 2-part TV broadcast of it, I remember watching, which had more. It was on TV way back, something like that. But so have you read the books?
No, I haven't, but I am familiar with it, and I thought I even saw the movie once or twice, but when it came out, I was just 2 years old, so I was a little too young. And
I didn't. I saw it on TV. It was. There's a part in that movie that is hard to watch. The Harkonnen thing is very dark, and
yeah, well,
it always gets me.
when I did a little bit of research for this episode, I was a little confused in how much detail there was and how much many characters there is in. So I hope after this conversation I'm a little wiser about it. So
Yeah, it's to me, it's as big as like War and Peace. It's just so much to read. It's such a large novel, and yeah, it's. I think that's why it's never been able to be made into a successful film because there's just so much. It would personally, I wish they made it into a miniseries instead on, streaming. But hopefully, this new movie will do it good justice, and they'll have. I know it's 2.5 hours the first part, and then they're going to make part two, and then hopefully it'll lead into a couple of books. But
Well, the whole concept reminds me a little bit of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I read those
yeah,
books multiple times, and like you said, also in Dune, it's very detailed. It's very you really have to go through the book a couple of times before you get the red thread in it, and um,
yeah,
sometimes it's very heavy to read.
yeah. I remember
So,
highlighting names and characters. There's just so many characters.
so how have you become interested in it, or how?
Well, I was just it was part of the '80s, and I liked all those films, and that one really stood out because it was unique at the time, and it was to me really neat and a bit mind blowing. Some of the stuff in it, the concepts, the whole, just that how they did it, and of course it's David Lynch who does some pretty weird stuff, the director. But no, I really got me into it was something different from Star Wars, and I was kind of kind of burned out on Star Wars now, and I'm glad they're doing this now because it's different. And it's kind of an adult version of Star Wars, I guess they'd call it. Some people say it's that. There's quite a few neat YouTube just on this subject. There's this one guy, I think he's from Europe, and he does all these videos on the Dune books and the Dune stuff. But no, I just thought it was neat. It had Sting, which is, he's only been in a few films, and but the books I've never read more than the first three. It just gets more and more diluted and far in the future as you read more of the books. It's kind of like if you read all of the 2001 books, it just gets further and further and it's hard to keep up. And then there's I think somebody else making new books now that are kind of about the different houses. There's a series of books out recently, but it's interesting. Have you ever seen that documentary about Joe Dabowski? He wanted to make it in the '70s. Pretty wild thing about he wanted to make it, and he had all these cats. And they never made the movie, but
Yeah, I did see some of the documentaries on YouTube, and especially about Dune. Yeah, it was still. It's like I said. If you really want to put this real and justice to the books, I guess you really need a lot of movies, or like you said, a miniseries to do it justice.
yeah,
So
which
can
they
you?
can. I think they could get away with a lot more now, because there's so many good mini. Oh, yeah. Well, there's so many good miniseries out now that take their time, and it would. I think it'd be better as it could. We'll see how it goes. It's in a couple weeks. The film comes.
Yeah,
Been
yeah,
waiting a long
yeah.
time for it. Yeah.
So can you tell the listeners a little bit about the storyline of Dune?
Well, you have these four houses: Harkonnen, Atreides, the great, and there's a good backstory of how this all comes about. And if you watch the long version of the film, which has a little backstory, but basically the planet Dune is. He wrote this obviously in the '60s. It has a lot of that in it, and the spice reminds me like marijuana, same thing. But the basic idea is it's the most precious thing in the universe, and they all fight over this thing, and whoever controls it controls the all of the commerce. And what's interesting is I think Frank was catching on how oil was a big deal. In some ways, there's a parallel to the Middle East and this series of books in some ways, different tribal nations and the whole thing. And that's why I like it. It's a different kind of science fiction. It had more based on politics, I guess. But no, it's really good. There's a lot in the books. there's some really fascinating things about how the spice affects people, and some of them get really, really smart, like the Benny Gesserit, how they have those powers, and they're really advanced. And I hope the movie kind of touches about that. But yeah, well, I'm sure you've looked into some of that.
Yeah, I did. Actually, it was very. I found some videos about explaining everything because when I just got into it, I was really confused because I didn't understand it. So I listened to those
Yeah.
videos, and I got a little bit wiser of it. And but still, I think it's yeah, like you said, you also because it's something that they. I think also you need to read the books because otherwise you don't understand the movie.
And even this movie will only get so much. There's just, as I said, there's so many little subplots in this thing. But it's kind of like, in some ways, the old Russian Empire and the different. I think of it as how he was writing it, because the different houses and who controls what, and it's like kind of like the First World War, the different groups and the whole. But I really think he was talking about the Middle East. There's a lot of that connection, and you just have to replace spice with oil, and this place has it on. But there's just a lot of neat religious stuff in it. There's a lot of neat stuff that's in it that.
Yeah, because what I did see also in, like I said, the videos and the movie, what's up with the very blue eyes?
That's what happens when you take the spice too long, and your eyes change, have a glow. And
Because
for humans, yeah,
am I understanding it correctly that when you there are just only certain people who can get that spice and also use it because I read somewhere it's about also navigation and
yeah. Well, the guild, the spicing guild, they're the ones that have all the. They can hold space, but they need to use a lot of the spice, and it's just an interesting concept of what it can do. I think it's based on the drug culture a lot, and and the whole. But in this stuff's supposed to make you be smarter. And when it was Paul Atreides who becomes the Messiah in some ways, he was, because it's just interesting, the breeding thing, and she was only allowed to have daughters, and that whole, you have to read that. But when he takes it, he can see different places. He can see there's a lot of religious undertone in the books that's what makes it interesting, and you can kind of pick it apart and say, oh, that looks like you got that from, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I remember when I was taking a science fiction literature class at college, we talked a lot about this one and a bunch of other books, but how this one was uniquely different. There's a little bit, reminds me of kind of Babylon 5, that lots of story that's so complicated, and anyways, but no, I really, one of my favorites from the 80s. It stands out as a unique story. I wish they could have made it longer. I'm hoping this new film will bring it back into the public, and they'll really get it appreciated. And I hope because he wants to do a couple of the books, which could take years to figure all these. But so far, it looks interesting. What I've seen, the little.
so what is your expectation of this new reboot movie?
Well, I know they can't do everything. Just like Lord of the Rings, people were upset that a few of the characters were missing from the books and the movies. It's like they can't put it all in there, but I hope overall it gives it. So far, what I've seen, the music's really weird. It's the whole. There's been a lot of hype about this, and I think it's going to be, to me, something to get away from Star Wars. And I'm really tired of all the Star Wars. I want to see something different, and I hope because he spent a lot of money on this. I mean, that I hope that he'll get to make at least the first three books into films would be amazing. It would be a new franchise. It would bring it back. And if he has to go on streaming, would be better. I think they could take their time. But I like the people that chose the cast. I thought it was interesting that the new Paul Atreides is younger than the one from the first film. It looks more like the books.
Is there a lot of difference between the movie and the books?
Well, the biggest difference is in the original 1984 movie, the whole weirding thing, the sound. If you've seen it, the sound thing was never in the book. They used special swords and some sort of suit. It wasn't that sound thing. That was the director's idea of using sound. So I think the new ones is more like the book. But other than that, it's very similar. They just didn't really, there's a lot of stuff they didn't get a cover about the Bene Gesserit and about the whole. If you get a chance and you can watch the long version that I have, it has a little 20-minute introduction that talks about where all of them came from, which helps a lot. It's a little cartoon thing, and it helps establish a lot of the stuff that's pretty detailed. And even the book, I remember had to reading it twice to get taking notes. It was like a kind of like a college assignment.
That's recognizable.
But it's a really, I think it was neat. He did a lot of stuff like that. I think that's what's neat about Frank, is he really touched on real problems at that time, just in a science fiction way, kind of like Star Trek. It had a little feeling. It's just very strange. But
Can you tell me something more about Paul?
Paul Atreides, yeah, the Duke son of the Atreides. He wasn't supposed to be. It's funny, born. She was only supposed to have daughters. That's what the Bene Gesserit were worried about this happening, because she was taking the spice and it got into him, and he kind of, yeah. But no, I like the actor that plays him. He's from in the 80s. He's been in a bunch of films, but yeah, he just knows a lot because he was trained by the Bene Gesserit, and he thinks there was a lot more on Arrakis than everybody else doesn't realize how many Fremen there were, and it's been kind of a big secret, which he brings to light. And he was really well trained too. I like how they had the Master of Assassins who trains him. I always forget, but anyways, and they got those little shields. I don't know. I haven't read this in 20 years, but I just remember little bits of it. The films are okay, but I was more interested in the Fremen, actually, because they're kind of the mystery, and they don't get revealed till later on. But
There's also what I read is about that the sandworms of Dune are protecting the spice, and
yes,
are they also something like the harvest tester, or
no, they're the indigenous life on the planet. They also consume it, and then there's the baby worms, is that water of life that they use to see the future, but only women can take it. And it's interesting, a whole parallel to the Bible. I suppose a little kind of see things that.
well, I do must say, when I saw the worms, it reminds me of that worm in that when Luke Skywalker was supposed to thrown into.
Oh, that.
But it is interesting how they put that whole world together.
It doesn't seem possible you could live on that desert planet. It would be like living in Mars. It in some ways, I look at that and go, how does it have atmospheres? Or just thinking about it, like the other planets are okay, but the neat thing about that is all the water's hidden underground in aquifers. And at the end, they reveal that it has water, which is interesting, because I was like, I wonder if there's water under Mars.
So there is also something about new technology. Can you tell me something about that?
The new technology, the stuff, the little.
Mm.
I mean, from the movie, the new secret weapon. They're always trying to one each other up. Each one of these houses. Seems like.
So the
Yeah,
houses
that's the.
are each other's enemies as well.
Well, the Baron, the Emperor controls all four, and mainly it's the Atreides and Harkonnens are always the enemy. But they're all far apart from each other. So Dune's kind of the catalyst for all of it. It's the resource. It kind of reminds me of, if you think of it, you got Israel and the other surrounding countries in the Middle East, and everything has always been around the oil. I always said if there was no oil, they wouldn't care as much about all these years. Similar kind of thought, but
So how addicted is the spice really, or how can I see it in?
yeah.
Is it easy available, or is it hard to get, or
I guess it depends if you're what level of influence, I'm assuming. But I think why it's addicting is you live longer. It gives you long life, as they say in the book. And also, I'm sure it's kind of like what we have experienced in real life. It probably has that hallucinogenic. I don't know. I never really delved into that. I was more interested in just the politics of how it worked. There was and the Fremen were what was interesting to me because they were very religious and very much like, oh, I'm sure they based him on some of the tribes in the Middle East. I'm assuming it has that kind of thinking. But I really would love to someday go to Jordan myself. Not just this movie; it's an amazing country, and it has that Petra, that ancient city carved in the rock from Indiana Jones. It would be neat to see it. If it's that kind of stuff looks really neat and ancient.
when you were into this, it's mostly for the political insight of what is.
For me, it was because I was really into history. I was kind of different as a kid. I really loved reading about history, Romans, different things, what got us to this point in life, and that the Dune books kind of remind me of that in their own way. It's also kind of like Star Trek, which can play on those serious subjects without making it, serious. It's kind of similar, but that's why I like the Dune book because it's kind of based on a history. You don't see as much science fiction. A lot of us, you know.
Do you have
Yeah,
any favorite books of Dune?
I like the second one. That one's really neat, where it has his daughter. I mean, his sister is an adult. She's got even more powers, and how things have kind of gotten out of control, and he has too much power now, and it gets much more complicated, I think. And then after that, it just I want to read the other couple, but they're so far away in the storyline because he's a legend in that distant one, and like the Messiah. I just haven't got around to it. I should if they're gonna Hollywood will let them make them into films. I should read the last of them. That would be neat. But it's been a long time waiting, and a lot of people really want to see this, or we're hoping it'll because
Mm.
it's one of the only science fiction books that's never really successfully worked on the screen because it's just too large. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the Russian version of War and Peace, which is like 8 hours,
Mm.
but it shows you how big that book is, and that's another big beast. But it's all in Russian. Yeah, it's really I have it. It's actually really good, and it's the only way to tell such a large story. That'd take you half a year to read that book. But no, I'm really into history. I really like that. That's my big connection to science fiction. I think is I like where you guys live in the UK. Lots of history, lots of good stuff, and museums and but no, I think that's what made me get into Dune was that I can recognize the similarities with the 20th century and the 60s when he wrote that. But it has a lot of little nuances. It's just, you got to kind of read in between the lines. You got to read it and take your time going back in that book. It would
Is
make
it
a great YouTube channel.
is it also a, good comparison with our daily life?
Well, I guess if you live in the Middle East, that's the one thing that we Westerners don't understand is they're so connected with their past. And I think that's what's interesting about the Fremen and some of the characters in the book is, people from
Mm.
Arabia. Or I think that's more connected in my thought. It's just,
Is there something else you like to add in the whole Dune aspect?
I really liked how they created the unique, different props in the 80s, the 1980s film. I really liked that. It had a lot of Romanesque, really neat, just how they interpreted the whole thing. I really liked the Desert Planet. I'm a big fan of Lawrence of Arabia, and this one kind of reminds me of that. And I'm planning to do a really neat. I want to do a neat painting of the just that scene with them on the rocks or something. It has a mysterious thing about it. I don't know. Is there something that drew you to the subject?
Well, like I said, I'm not have been really into Dune, and I do know. I don't know if it will catch me. If it is like Babylon 5 or Star Trek or so,
Yeah,
maybe it's just also, and that is the stupid thing I always have. I had that, for example, with Lord of the Rings. I saw the movie first before I read the books. So I
yeah,
also, when I read the books, I pictured Elijah Wood as Frodo and
yeah.
etc. 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 And I don't know if I'm going to do that with Dune as well. Only, yeah, like I said, I don't know if Dune is the book that will.
It's yeah, it's not for everyone. It's just a little. It's definitely kind of out there. I think it compared to the Star Trek, and
Is it something
it's
else
kind of
also
different.
like you love it or you hate it?
I guess I just thought it was unique, and that's why I like it. I want more unique stuff personally. I think I'm much happier with some of the new shows online. They just look more different, like Expanse. I thought was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, different. Um, really looking forward to that Wheel of Time thing that's coming out here too, November. But no, I'm just kind of seen so much stuff that it's a lot of science fiction kind of plays off each other. I've noticed, and it's nice to see something different and fresh. And I'm glad he's doing it because he did a great job on Blade Runner 2049. I watched it a few times. That's another good subject. The Blade Runner, those books. The read all them.
So I guess when you have seen that movie, then that we have to do another episode about Dune and hear
Yeah.
about what you think about.
Well, I wanted to get through the second half. I'm hoping that I'll be able to make the second half when we see the whole thing first, because it's like Lord of the Rings. You couldn't wait for the next half. But yeah, but Lord of the Rings has a special place for me because I grew up with that. My sister got me into it. God, it's been around a long time, and that takes about a year of your life to read that whole. It seems like get it. It was like doing a college course and all little. There's so many characters, but
But
yeah,
also,
it's
also very detailed how everything looks like. And that is, I think, one of, and I've heard that in because I have the extended versions of the Lord of the Rings. There was
yeah,
one of the documentaries in it that they say if they didn't know if they were lost in how something had to be look like or when they have to say something, they always picked up the book, and then they will go from there.
Yeah, Peter Jackson was really obsessed with that. He that was his baby, and I'm glad. I'm
Yes.
really happy he got to do it. It's nobody ever could do it. They've tried, but they did an animated thing. But he took the time, and they gave him the freedom to make it as long as he wanted to make. Which the third book is a little too long. I remember watching it in the theater, and people are like, "Is it over yet?" Because it just kind of drags. It drags out a long way.
Yeah, it is. But I must say, it does make it fun of the story, and I do
Yeah.
like the extended edition because there is so much more in it than the cinema one. And there are
Yeah.
like the deleted scenes from the cinema is in the extended version, and it's explained so much more
You get
than.
more with the elf princess and some of the characters, but yeah, even I remember a few people were upset that they didn't have as a minor character, I forget it is one of the Hobbit characters,
Bombadil.
and
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
little characters, but it wasn't that big of a deal. The biggest difference I think with the films is they put more of her in it, and she was not in the book. What's her name? That I always forget. I always think of her from the actress, but elf princess at the end, and she was not as big of a character in the books. But they wanted to keep that premise going. It'll be neat to see when they do this earlier Lord of the Rings miniseries on when Netflix or one of them they're going to do but that'll be the second age. It'll be a different period, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting, and I'm
How that
very
works.
curious about that. So we will see what happens, and
I
yeah.
hope it's as big. I hope it's as big and grand as Game of Thrones was, because wait to see all that was really dramatic thing. but, but yeah, it'll be interesting. It's a very expensive project I've heard about. Hopefully they'll film it in New Zealand like they did the others.
Well, I think we have covered a little bit what we
Yeah,
want to talk about Dune. So, thank you again. It was nice talking to you.
yeah. I hope you can maybe get some of these actors on here sometime. Interview some of the people involved in some of this stuff. That I'm just thinking Comic-Con or
I
I
know,
don't
I
know.
know, I know. But yeah, like I
What
said in our former conversation, it's now it's just starting all again. Too. So yeah, who knows? We will see.
Because
So
I've seen really neat YouTubes I watched where they'd have William Shatner and they'd be talking to him. It's just neat to see that.
yeah.
But I can't believe he's going into space at 90. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, but it is typical him. It wouldn't be him if he wouldn't go.
I remember meeting him at once at a convention, and he was really entertaining character person. Did funny stuff, but yeah. And he's still alive, one of the few that's still going. But yeah, I
Well,
saw that. Did you see that thing? I think a week ago they had Star Trek Day on whole 2-hour podcast about Star Trek Day and Paramount, and they had
okay. No, I
yeah, it
didn't
was
see
neat.
that.
Oh, it was neat to watch. You can probably find it on YouTube, but it had all of them, and they talked about the different shows and the new shows. I
Yeah.
guess they do it every year now. Is it 55 years?
Well, it was nice talking to you,
Yeah,
and I hope we can get around another time. So
yep,
till the next episode.
yeah. All right. Have a good one.
Dear listeners, I'd like to thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope you like it, and I try to be diverse as much as I can. Tell me what you think, how I'm doing with this podcast. If you have any tips for me, how I can do things better, let me know. If you'd like to talk about this episode or want to comment on this episode, you can reach out on Podbean, the Facebook group, the YouTube channel, and the Discord server of Orinda Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. And I also have a Twitter account especially for this podcast at OTFASP. Orinda Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi is also to listen, follow, and subscribe on Podbean, Spotify, Google Podcast, the Facebook group, and the YouTube channel. The next episode we will talk about Dragon Ball Z. I'm your host Orinda. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.